When you think about starting university, Freshers' Week might be top of the list. Making new friends, a new town or city, and yeah, maybe the lectures too. But then there's the debt, and there are big changes to student finance in England from this September. If you're about to start a degree, paying back your loan is going to cost you more, with many having to start paying back the loan sooner and for a much longer period. Now, the value of a degree could help your earnings in years to come, but if you're paying off a student loan for 40 years, is uni still worth it? I'm Leah Boleto, and this is the Sky News Daily. We'll be talking to a money expert who will run us through the changes, and we'll hear from an expert who advises young people and parents about their options when it comes to finding a university place. But first, let's hear from Thea. She's 17 and knee-deep in revision notes for her A-level exams, but took a break to talk to us. Thea, how are you feeling about your exams?
My first exam is in a week on Wednesday, so, hopefully all goes well, but we'll see.
Prepared as you can be, I bet, eh?
Yeah, something along those lines.
So do talk to me a bit about your plans after school. What kind of career are you hoping to do? Are you looking to go to university?
At the moment, yeah, I am. So I'm hoping to study physics at Leeds. And I think in the long term, I'd quite like to join the army or something along those lines.
Oh, wow. That sounds massively impressive. I know you've got so much on your plate already with exams and, navigating that. But have you given the cost of university much thought so far?
Yeah, that's obviously a big factor in university. So for me, I have taken out a loan for uni for the tuition fees. Obviously, I think that's about, I think for Leeds, it's 9,250 a year. And then for Swansea, which is my second choice uni, I think it's about the same. So I've taken out a loan for that, and I've also taken out a maintenance loan. I'm obviously quite concerned about that, and I know the changes that have come. So that's kind of weighing on me a little bit and thinking about how much money actually goes into it.
So where's your head at the moment then? You're pretty determined that you will go to university despite the costs, or does it weigh down on you heavily at all?
It does definitely weigh on me. I am of the idea that as soon as I go to uni, I'm going to keep up with the job that I have currently in a different... So I'm a lifeguard, so I can go and do that at a different centre just so I can keep myself coming on. And over the past couple of years, I've been saving up from my job to accommodate for uni. And for me, I'm very lucky. I'm in quite a privileged position where, my parents can chip in every now and again if I need that help. But I do know people who don't have that privilege. And I think it's those sorts of people that are going to need a lot more help than me. So, for example, I know a lot of people just decide to stay at home because they just they don't have the money to go and live away from home. But yeah, it's definitely something that's weighing on my mind and something that it's very stressful in a time of extreme stress anyway.
Those changes will impact hundreds of thousands of students just like you, Thea, who are just about to start their degrees. But it wasn't always like this. Greg Marsh, household finance expert and founder of money-saving website nows.co.uk, is also with me. Hi, Greg. How are you?
I'm well, thanks.
And Greg, did you go to uni?
I did some years ago now. I certainly did, and enjoyed it a lot. Had a student loan at the end of it, and celebrated very much when I finally paid that off some years ago now. But yes, I remember opening a celebratory bottle of wine when I finally cleared the debt.
Oh, same here. I think mine was about 10 years ago I paid it off. And yeah, there is that moment where you feel like, wow, I've accomplished that and it's finished. But look, changes are coming for students, aren't they, this September? But first of all, can you run through exactly how student loans work currently?
Yeah, so when you go to university, you have two big costs. The first big cost, of course, is your tuition fees, and the second big cost is the cost of living. And the student loan scheme is intended to help students finance those costs, unless you've got very wealthy parents and they're very generous. Most of us have to dig into our own pockets for that. The student loan scheme allows you to borrow money up to, typically, most students when they graduate, about £45,000 or thereabouts for a 3-year degree, to cover those living costs and tuition fee costs. But you then have to pay that money back. And you pay that money back under the current scheme, which is about to change, over up to 30 years. And under the new scheme, the new Plan 5 scheme, over 40 years. But you only pay it back over that long period of time if you earn above a threshold. And then that critically means that people who earn more will pay their loans back sooner, and people who earn much less may never pay back their loans or pay back a smaller proportion of their loan.
Okay, I've got you. I'm up to date. But as we said, changes are coming. What are those changes, Greg?
Well, the big change is that a graduate who finishes uni age 21 will keep paying until they're 61, which means they'll be making payments for most of their working life. Now, there's two other important changes in the Plan 5 scheme. The first is that the interest rate for those repayments is lower. So notionally, it's less interest every year. However, the new students will start repaying at a lower threshold. Rather than that threshold being a little over £27,000, they'll start repaying at a lower threshold of £25,000. So that means they'll be paying more back every year on the same income. And analysts calculate that for a typical student, over the lifetime of their loan, they will pay a lot more. In total, possibly about twice as much. And it's even more subtle than that, because higher income earning students, because of the lower interest rate, will actually end up paying less overall. But those on middle incomes, lower income, middle income earners will be hit more by the changes. So nurses and teachers, if they've got a university degree, will end up having probably a significantly higher cost of their student loan.
So people will start paying their loans back earlier, but over a longer period. And you've touched on it there. These changes, who will they most impact then?
Well, these changes will impact all students who start at a university degree from this September onwards. And all those people will see a difference. It's just that if you're a higher income earner, the difference, because the interest rate is lower and you're paying back your loan faster, you may end up actually clearing your debt relatively early in your working life. Those who have lower incomes, they'll be above the threshold for having to pay back their loan after a few years of work, but that loan is not going to go away until they get into their 60s. And even though the interest rate is lower because the threshold is also lower, as a result, someone, for instance, on £30,000 will probably end up paying something in the region of about £450 a year for interest rather than £250.
The Department for Education says the reforms are needed to give more value for money for taxpayers. It says it will mean more than half of new borrowers will repay their loans compared to the current rate of 20%. Greg, why now? Why have the changes been brought in now?
The cynic in me would say that this is about the public finances. The long-run savings for taxpayers as a result of these changes is something in the order of about nearly £2.5 billion, according to the Institute of Fiscal Studies. So there is a very significant public finance benefit to making a change like this. You might argue, if you were so minded, that this change is more likely to encourage students to select degrees that are going to lead to higher, or hope to lead to higher salaries over their working life. Whether it will have that effect, I think that's for listeners to decide. But I think those are the two arguments in favour of this. Clearly, the arguments against this are that it's going to be more money and for longer, and for many students, particularly those on middle incomes, it's not good news.
So really shrinking the spending power of those people, along with all the other costs of living pressures. It's been described as a tax. Would you agree?
It's a funny sort of half tax, half debt thing. It looks a lot more like tax than like debt. But when originally student loans were introduced, of course, the intention was to try not to manage them as a tax from the perspective of the public finances. But to all intents and purposes, they're a bit like a tax, because if you don't earn more than that threshold, you never pay them back. And when they pay back their loan, again, more like a tax than like debt. It comes out of your paycheck. It's not money that you have to pay at the end of the month from your bank account. So yes, it has this quality of being a bit tax-like, But many students feel that they have this weight on their back. So to say that it's just a tax, I think, yes, it has tax qualities, but it also makes psychologically many people feel it as debt, and that affects the way people live and the way people think about their income.
I speak to a lot of young people, and a lot of my work is about actually how this younger generation is really up against it in many ways.
Lee Elliot Major is a professor of social mobility with the University of Exeter. He spends a lot of time advising young people on how to navigate the complex higher education system. Lee, do you think this will put people off going to university? And I wonder whether this would have ever put you off. I think it would have me back, we're talking 20 years ago now.
It's really hard, isn't it? You all know this, to put yourself back in that, 16, 17-year-old self. I didn't know hardly anything about the higher education system at the time. I was on social security. I was living on my own. If someone had said, right, Lee, it's going to cost you £50,000 to do this, I think that would have put me off. I think that's a real pity. And things like, teachers and nurses and things like that, I think we could have designed the system better to support those people, in my view, doing the jobs that we should all value. So I do really worry about that. That means to me that I think we've got to work much harder in the way we communicate these messages, because I do think it's worth it in the end, because you probably, on average, will earn more than if you don't do a degree.
That's so interesting. You still think university is a sensible investment for students, but I guess the weight of debt, if they're looking at it in a debt sense, will be something that they'll be carrying for the rest of their working lives. Do you think some degrees, some universities are better value for money? And should they be looking at the university prospect differently with these changes in mind?
So I think you've got to be really careful in your choices. I do think it is a good investment, but only if you do the homework. Is there a work placement as part of the degree? For some people, that would be, a good thing to look at. Is there sometimes, there's these amazing degrees where you go abroad for a year as part of that. There are different types of degree courses out there. They're all different. To be honest, some of them are good at some things, not so good at others, right? And I do think you just need to look at degrees and what are the links with the workplace? I think some degrees are much better at that than others.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think these days there are really good sort of apprenticeship options now out there. I call it the sort of dinner table test. If you're with a bunch of mums and dads around the dinner table, this is a bit of a middle class thing, this now, and someone says, oh yeah, my daughter's doing an apprenticeship. I think 20 years ago, everyone would have put their noses up. They were like, oh, that means they aren't doing so well. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think there's some really good apprenticeships out there, and I think as a young person, you need to think about. The other thing I would say, I do think that you can take your time with this, and maybe do go out and get a job for a year or even and then come back to it. The way the system works increasingly is you can go and get a loan later, and I think that's a really good thing. Again, with all the studies I do, what we're finding is, this is more anecdotes than research, but my sense is people are younger for their age than they were a generation ago. What do I mean by that? I suspect you and me were just a bit more mature in some ways when we were 17, 18, because we had to be honest. For all sorts of complex reasons, I just think young people now are just slightly more, particularly the COVID generation. So, I just fear that they're making these big decisions quite early on in their lives.
So, Lee, what is your advice to students now who might be worried about the costs?
So I would say, do your homework, have a look around, ask the university questions. They get the money for these courses. I think it's quite right that you should go and ask questions about how many tutorials are there? What have the students done who have graduated from that course? if you have time, I would try and find a graduate from that degree course. That's the best thing of all. What was it really like? So I would do lots of homework to decide on which degree you do, because not every degree is the same. And I think we tend to think of universities as all the same. They're all different. And within universities, there's some really good courses, and there's some that aren't so good. So, really do your homework, because this is one of the biggest decisions you'll make, not just because of the money, because of the way it will change your life.
Thea, let's come back to you. I mean, aside from the huge challenges that you have ahead, the cost of living and paying for the course, are you excited about uni? How are you feeling about it?
I think the general consensus amongst me and my mates is very positive. We are excited to go there, but there is this also kind of looming thing of financial and also housing issues once we get there. So I have a couple friends going to Manchester talking about applying for accommodation, who are very stressed out about that and that sort of thing. So I think, the general consensus is excitement, but also there is a lot of stress.
My thanks to Thea Roland, Lee Elliot Major, Greg Marsh, and to you for listening to this episode of the Sky News Daily with me, Leah Boleto. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed. The editor is Philly Beaumont.